Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Rabbi Eric Walker. Often a medical diagnosis can be life-changing. The unknown can become overwhelming and all-consuming. Fear can take over our thinking and rob us of our joy. Our next guest says often people feel alone in their health struggles, so by sharing these true stories of some of my patients over the years, I hope that readers can reframe their mindset. These patients had a depth of character, determination of spirit, and passion for life that defies human explanation. Their lives can help others realize that their challenges can become their biggest blessings. Dr. Charles Page is the best guy to see on the worst day of your life. He's a surgeon, author, storyteller, and coffee addict. He's authored several books, including Surrendered Sleep, A Biblical Perspective, Ozzy's Dance, and The One-Eyed Monster Under My Bed. He and his wife Joanna live in Texas with their 5 children. He enjoys bush hogging on his tractor, playing with the kids in their triple-decker treehouse, and watching sunsets on the back porch. Here to talk about his new book, A Spoonful of Courage for the Sick and Suffering, is Dr. Charles Page. Dr. Page, Chuck, welcome into this edition of Revealing the Truth.
Hello, Rabbi Eric. How are you?
Great, thank you. Welcome back from a trip to Africa. You just got back.
Yes, sir.
And you just moved into a new office, so you had kind of two transitions going on at the same time.
A lot of moving parts.
What was the Africa trip about?
Well, I've been going to the country of Malawi since about 2004. In fact, this was my 3rd trip with my children. I've taken my 3 oldest children with me. It's an evangelism trip there. We usually fly out of Johannesburg into Lilongwe. We spent about 2 weeks there just sharing the gospel with people in the villages. You know, it's amazing to think in our day that there are places that still have no running water, no electricity, no paved roads. But the missionaries there have pastors and churches, and so we're just there encouraging the Christians and sharing the gospel. It's amazing to see how receptive these people are, Eric, in their desperation. It's so different than what we experience here.
You know, it's interesting that I've found several parallels. I've traveled all over the world myself and shared the gospel in many unusual places, but I find that the impoverished, those who are living in a standard that maybe we don't understand because we have this Western world view, that when we go into communities like that they're not aware of their circumstances by comparison. They enjoy the fruit of their labor. They enjoy the land that they live on. They have a sense of community. They have a different sense of identity, a different connection with the sand, with the soil, with the wind, with the rain, with the seasons. And it's really I want to say maybe a more spiritual level, because they don't have the distractions and the creature comforts that we have that wind up covering up a whole lot. We can find a way to distract ourselves from all of our circumstances. They've got the sun and the moon and the rain and the animals and the crops, if God blesses them with water, with enough to raise food. And if not, then they have storehouses and they figure out what to do.
Well said. You know, it's interesting. You think about that and you kind of wonder, really, who are the rich people and who are the poor people? Perhaps maybe they're richer in such a deeper way that we could never really understand. And that's one of the things that you get over there. All the distractions and the stuff that we have often cause us to neglect what's really important in life.
Well, I know many people that do medical mission trips and Doctors Without Borders and going into various communities. It's interesting that you come at it from an evangelical perspective.
Yes, sir.
I'm sure you've done plenty of work from a medical standpoint. I'm sure that you would not sit in front of somebody who has a gaping wound and not respond to that. It's kind of what it says in Scripture, that when your hungry brother comes to you and you say, "God bless you," and you don't put food in his bed, you're not doing anything for him or for the Lord. It's hard to evangelize somebody who has not had a meal in 3 days.
Absolutely. What's interesting about doing medical missions in Africa is just the lack of resources. And so in what I try to focus on is training the surgeons there and showing them kind of what I've learned over the years, some of the tricks, and really, investing in the lives of people over there that hopefully will be the changers in healthcare. But there are no resources. It's really, when I go over there and do medical missions, it really helps me to just press my reset button. Things are so different over here, and our focus, like you said, it's so on other things that distract us from the main thing, which is serving the patient.
You have a heart that comes through it comes through your posture, it comes through your countenance when you talk about the people that you care so much for. Where was this birthed in you? What was your background? Where did you grow up? What were mom and dad like? What was this value system that you grew up under that would cause you both to become a scientist, a medical professional, a surgeon, but also an evangelist, a man of faith?
Well, I became a Christian at age 16, and I would say that my family was one of those families that initially they were very involved in church. My mother and father somehow got away from that, and over the years became involved in their business and involved in their life. But God got a hold of my life, and one Sunday morning, actually, I accepted Christ after hearing a friend tell me about the gospel at my house. It wasn't a church. And so it's been a journey for me. I first was involved in some churches, those kind of churches that are, that tell you to believe and not ask questions. And then I went to a liberal arts university, which really challenged my faith and challenged me to think about issues and things. And I was discipled by some very patient people and learned the process. And I've just always had people that have invested in my life. My mom and dad were not educated people. They were, farmers and nurserymen. And so, medicine was a completely new field for our family. In fact, it was a calling for me. I felt like it was something that God called me into. And of course, there's the old saying, the faith that can't be tested can't be trusted. And so I had to go through a lot of times of testing, and learning all those things that we learned. But through it all, God's been faithful. But I really started getting involved more in missions in 2004 when I began doing these evangelism trips. It's interesting. Most Christians in the West never really have an opportunity to share their faith and see someone respond to the gospel. And that's the thing that I've really learned. In fact, this is, like I said, my third trip carrying my children, and this is my third child, Georgiana. She's 17, and it just really rocked her world. She's very timid, and she's not what you would consider one of those heroes or one of those preachers or whatever, but just getting out there and sharing her faith and connecting with people and giving them a simple message. In many places, people respond. So it just shows us how powerful the gospel is.
Well, the gospel's powerful in our own neighborhoods, and we're not sharing it in our own neighborhoods. I find it fascinating that coming at it from a Jewish perspective, that it's become the great omission, not the great commission. And the great omission is we're going to preach the gospel to everybody but the Jews and the Muslims, because they're too hard to reach. And so and then there's a whole other lifestyle group because they're hard to reach. And then there's another age group, and they have a whole different value system. So we're just not going to try to reach the millennials with the gospel. So what are we doing? Our churches are shrinking. Our communities of faith are being less impactful. There's more social movement and social connection than there is gospel connection. And so the relevance of the message in day-to-day applied life is losing ground because the example is not being set. Children are not seeing their mothers and fathers reading their Bibles. and growing up in an environment where mom and dad have devotional time, or they ever see or experience anything like that. So this is the same picture as it was of me being we consider ourselves to be the first post-Holocaust generation. I was born in 1952, and so we were a generation, we questioned everything that went on in America. Right? Our Eastern European background, because of, here America's involved in a war, are we the Cossacks in that war? Who are we? What's this picture? We've been a persecuted people for thousands of years. What are we doing in Vietnam? What are we doing in Korea? What are we doing in these various places? And so we became a very perceptive generation and very probative, and we didn't care that this was the United States of America that sent the army there, and we're just going to blindly back you. No, we don't think we should be there. Okay, we think we're there for now. I will admit we handled it the way we treated the veterans the wrong way, but our stance about our government involvement in a war we should not have been in was spot on, and that message still hasn't changed to this day. We should not have been engaged in that battle that France got us so encumbered in. But yet we're seeing a generation, the offspring now, my daughter turns 30 tomorrow, of raising a generation of the same ones they're talking about relevance. They're talking about, what are you doing? How are you making a difference? How are you changing the world? How are you making this better than you found it? Right? And asking those questions. And as believers, if we're not making the world better because of our faith, then how significant is our faith?
Well said. Well said. It's funny. We really are. We're not asking those difficult questions anymore.
You're a doctor. I come to you when I think something's going on. I'm in the age bracket where I get pestered by Medicare about getting my annual wellness check. I mean, they're gonna bother me, and they have since my birthday in January. It's now July the 17th, and I'm going today. They bothered me for 7 months and hammered on me. Go get that wellness check. There's nothing wrong with me. I don't take any medications. I don't have any issues. God's blessed me with great health. My mother's 93 years old. She takes an baby aspirin. I take a baby aspirin. We live a long time. So, but you ask probative questions, and you do something that's really quite spiritually fascinating, and that is, if I come to you and I say I have a pain, you will, let's say it's abdominal, okay? You'll start pushing and you'll say, does this hurt? Does this hurt? Does this hurt? And when you finally hit the spot and I yell out, ouch, there's something you do automatically. As a doctor, you are automatically going to do something. You do it by instinct and by training, right? And I hate you for it, because you press the spot a second time, immediately. Once you've found out where it hurts, you then begin the next step of the process in trying to determine why it hurts.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
This is the same biblical message for each one of us, that when we have people say things to us that offend us or upset us, that we need to probe to find out why. Okay. Now we walk around so offended all the time. We need to start examining ourselves and saying, wait a second, that bothered me, but before I respond to it, I need to examine myself and say, why? Why did that hurt? Why did that bother me? Maybe there's some truth to it.
Pain can be a good thing. I mean, pain can be one of those things that helps us to realize that there is a problem. I mean, so often, we kind of live in a sterilized world here in the West where we don't want to experience any type of pain. And one aspect of that is tolerance, and but just to be able to, to handle the hard questions, and like you said, really be introspective about things. One of the interesting things about medicines, and this may be changing the subject, but we've kind of moved away from that. What the physicians of old used to really rely on, just listening to people, and getting a good history and understanding exactly why they have why this is going on. And so we're so quick to make a diagnosis. We'll get a CAT scan or a test, but we don't spend the time listening and examining. And then we come up with the diagnosis. We prescribe before we diagnose. It'd be like me going to you and saying, here, these glasses work great on me. Why don't you try these? And of course, that's not going to work well with you. And so often we do that with other people without really stopping and listening and understanding kind of what's going on spiritually and emotionally.
Medicine is supposed to be the scriptural extension, if you will, of God's dominion mandate. He brought everything to Adam to name, and everything he could name, he gave him dominion over. Right? So once you as a doctor have a diagnosis, then once you have a name for it, now you can go through a process of ruling out until you pinpoint what it is, but you can't effectively treat and render cure unless you have a clear diagnosis. So
absolutely, that works both medically and spiritually.
Exactly.
So medically, I see people all the time that have been misdiagnosed something very simple, and often they get all these tests and all of these other things when really all they needed was someone just to listen to them and examine them. And I think that works for us spiritually too. So often with our issues, if we would just stop and listen, Jesus was the great physician, and he does know the remedy, for our ills.
When I think about people receiving a diagnosis, we read a story about 12 spies. 12 spies, 12 patients went to the same doctor.
Yes, sir.
12 people were shown the same CAT scan, the same PET scan that showed that there was a large growth in a particular place. The 12 of them came back from the doctor, and they said, well, what did the doctor say? And 10 of them said, we're going to die. We've got cancer, and we're going to die. And 2 of them came back and said, you know what? There's a tremendous opportunity awaiting us. There was all around this one place was gloriously wonderful, but there's a couple of obstacles we're going to have to overcome in order to really enjoy this land. Well, what happened? The 10 that said that they were going to die, died. And the 2 that said, yeah, we took a good assessment. The land was good. There's some big guys. There's some big people there. Okay, we're going to have some things to contend with, but we are going to overcome. It truly is the glorious promised land. And they all looked at the same diagnosis. They looked at the very same set of test results. Does our perspective have an impact on our outcome?
Absolutely. And so like you were going with that illustration of Joshua and Caleb, it's important that we see our circumstances through the lenses of faith. So often we see God through our circumstances instead of seeing our circumstances first through God and putting on those God type of lenses. And that's what Joshua and Caleb did. They saw that there were problems. They saw that there were obstacles, but yet they looked at them differently. In regards to like disease and suffering and difficult circumstances, suffering brings opportunity if we just look for them. It says in Hebrews 4, it talks about how we can approach the throne of grace and how we, obtain mercy, but how we find grace. We find in life often what we look for, those lenses that we're using to look through. And so, suffering brings an opportunity to grow and mature spiritually. Talk about Romans 5, how we rejoice, how we rejoice in our tribulations, knowing that our suffering brings these areas of growth in our life. So the opportunity to mature and grow, and think about the people of Israel, how they grew and matured as they crossed that Jordan. They didn't grow much in the wilderness, But the other opportunity that we see with suffering is that it's an invitation to intimacy. And I was reading this morning in my quiet time, Psalm 46. It says, that God is our refuge and strength and an ever-present help in time of trouble. Ever-present help. How His presence. And, whenever we go through difficult circumstances, especially health problems, it seems like God's presence is so much sweeter, in our lives. And just being able to see that as an opportunity. That it's an opportunity to really to know God in a way that we never really have. When our health is taken away from us and we have to really depend upon God. So, but also we have an opportunity to influence others. I mean, I'll tell you, I can't tell you how many times I've seen people who are sick and suffering and going through an illness who have that finally have that opportunity to talk with a wayward child and influence them, for the Lord, and so we forget all that because people are really, when we're going through a difficult circumstance, people are really watching us. It's almost like I play guitar. It's almost like playing a guitar without the loudspeaker. You put the amp on a guitar. I mean, it really that sound goes everywhere, and that's what suffering does. Suffering is like that amplifier that helps people to be able to really see what we're made of.
Well, you certainly are in a position where you are exposed to people with various diagnoses. Some of them are curable, some not curable. Some of them are treatable. You can improve the quality of life. Palliative care. You, as a surgeon, you have to deal with it from the good news to the bad news to the gathering the family together and praying with them, and that's something that you do. This work, A Spoonful of Courage for the Sick and Suffering, transforming your greatest challenges and your biggest blessings, is your contribution to let people know that there's, even in your infirmity, even in the worst of times, God is present and can use that circumstance to break off the stony heart, to shatter the hard places, to bring a sense of humility or reconciliation even to the most difficult of situations. We're talking with Dr. Charles Page, author of the new book, A Spoonful of Courage for the Sick and Suffering, Transforming Your Greatest Challenges and Your Biggest Blessings. It's a compilation of stories of patient interactions, not their medical, but their spiritual. It takes you into their medical, what their condition was and what they were dealing with, but it's more a story of encouragement, of looking at the heart of the people that he was treating and how they responded in faith and how important faith was in their circumstances and their response to their circumstances. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back from break, we're going to dig into some of these stories and find out what makes each one of these stories special and different, and how you too can find courage in your suffering, in your infirmity, and how God can use your testimony even while you're there with 4 other people while they're getting their chemotherapy, even while you're there in the same waiting room, same lobby, at the same doctor's office, where you look around, you know everybody has the same reason for being there. You don't go to an oncologist because you've got a toothache. And so we need to understand that this is a message of hope. This is a message of God working to heal, to restore, and even bring comfort in the face of death. We'll take a short break and we'll be right back. Not everything that makes the headlines has biblical importance, but many events that happen around the world do, and you never hear about them. Igniting a Nation is pleased to teach Revealing Prophecy every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. at the Marriott 280 in Birmingham. We will cover worldwide events and insider information that will connect the dots of what's happening around the world with biblical prophecy. If you happen to miss a class, we'll televise each week's class at 10 o'clock Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our social media outlets. Copies of the teachings will also be available to purchase on our website at www.ignitinganation.com. The Lord meets you right where you are, and so does Igniting a Nation's new live streaming outlets. You can now watch Revealing the Truth, Revealing the Bible, and Prophecy Revealed simulcast live each Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 1 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time on YouTube Live, Facebook Live, Vimeo, Periscope, and through our website, www.ignitinganation.com. No matter what device you are using, our program will automatically scale so you won't have to miss a single program. And if you happen to miss an episode, you can always subscribe to the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel and access over 1,000 interviews and never miss your favorite authors, special guests, and topics that interest you the most.
There are lots of ways to see Israel, but nothing compares to seeing the land of the book and the people of the book through the eyes of two Jewish believers who can take you on a journey that will bring the entire Bible to life. When you join Rabbi Eric Walker and his #1 rated tour guide, Edo Canaan, in Israel, you'll experience incredible teachings, first-class accommodations, and actually walk where Jesus walked. You will experience the Bible transforming from black and white into living color, and you will never see the Bible in the same way again. For more information, visit us at www.igniting.com/events.
The Lord contends with what contends with you, and Igniting a Nation is committed to bringing to light each and every issue that faces a believer's life. Our live stream programming and teachings take you on a journey to finding biblical truth from a wide variety of experts who share their insights into a deeper walk with the Lord. We have assembled the most comprehensive panel of experts in the fields of prophecy, caregiving, healing from trauma, shame, and abuse, and so much more. We continue to expand our teachings and programming to meet your needs. We're committed to healing the nations with biblical truth. Visit www.ignitinganation.com to develop a deeper walk with the Lord and start your journey to a transformed life. The Bible commands us to study to show ourselves approved, but most study using Bible study tools and not actually studying the Bible chapter and verse. Igniting a Nation is pleased to present Revealing the Bible, recorded and taught each week before a live audience. We take you deeper into the actual Bible and verse in both Hebrew and English and connect the dots between the Old and New Testament. You can attend our 2 classes in Tuscaloosa and Birmingham, or watch the program every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our other simulcast outlets. For more information, visit www.ignitinganation.com/events. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Dr. Charles Page, author of the new book, A Spoonful of Courage for the Sick and Suffering, Transforming Your Greatest Challenges into Your Biggest Blessings. Dr. Charles Page, welcome back to Revealing the Truth.
Thank you, sir.
Great to have you on. This is quite a work you've undertaken. This is a compilation of stories about people who have modeled faith and courage in their difficulties. What made you, 20 years of practicing medicine, what made you decide that you wanted to chronicle some of these stories?
Well, I've over the years, I've listened to my patients and I've learned their stories and learned their life lessons, and I've realized the impact that faith in God can have. So, but really kind of what gave me that spiritual kick in the pants was about 3 years ago, my office burned down. So I was on call, and I was going home. My computer had messed up, and I heard this big sound outside of the office, and I was driving home, and I got this call from the emergency room, and the nurses said, I'd just been to the emergency room. I said, well, what could possibly be there? They said, no, doctor, it's not a patient. Your office is on fire. And this is my office that I owned, that I was using as an investment, hopefully for my retirement. And I watched it go up in flames. And but what I realized during that time is, as I began, as kind of word spread in our small town about my tragedy, I began to hear other people's stories, and they began to share me their stories, and it really, I was kind of throwing a little pity party myself, and when I heard other people's stories, I really, it really adjusted my attitude. For example, there was one guy, he told me his fire story. He was in his house, and his house was burning down. He had an invalid wife, and he couldn't get her out. And so that man watched his house burn down with his wife inside. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, my little problem paled in comparison to his. And then I hear these stories about people with cancer. Doctor, just give me 6 more months so I can see my first grandkid, born. Those kind of things. And you realize often that your problems are not as bad as you thought. And that's kind of one of the motives of writing these stories, is that as we hear other people's stories, we realize that we're not alone. Like it says in Hebrews, there's that great cloud of witnesses that surround us, that are cheering us on, and we often don't realize that. I mean, we often feel like we're the only person on the planet that's experiencing this problem. And yes, all of our circumstances are unique, but in another sense, they're not. So, but what's interesting, Rabbi, is that in my office I found 4 things that I could really rebuild my life on. And there's an old stairwell where I prayed going up to my office, and I'm not the best prayer in the world, and a lot of times I get distracted. And so I pray on my knees and walk up the stairs on my knees. And I was kind of wondering if that stairwell was going to be there in that burned down building. And as I went in, the first thing I found was an old Bible that the fire had burned and charred, but the words were still intact. And that kind of reminded me of God's promises. And the second thing I found was an old doctor's bag, the old-fashioned doctor's bag that, that doctors used to carry around in the day. Well, the smoke had charred this black doctor's bag into something that was really beautiful, looked almost new, and I realized that I still had a practice. Even though I didn't have a building, I still had a practice. God still had a purpose for me to practice medicine, although it may change, and it is changing now. But that was another thing that I could build my life on. A little further up the stairs, there were pictures of my 5 children, and the fire had taken those colored pictures and turned them kind of a gray color, kind of like an Ansel Adams picture. And I realized at that point that I needed to spend more time investing in my family, just like I did with Georgiana, taking her to Africa, investing in her spiritually. There were still people in my family that I needed to really begin to focusing my attention on. But up at the top, Rabbi, of my stairwell, there was this beautiful stained wall that had a cross on it. And the fire had kind of blackened it and charred it, and it looked hideous. But what was really interesting, when I took that cross off the wall, there was an imprint of that cross in the beautiful stained wood that was still intact behind that charred wall. And I thought about our lives. What matters in our lives when we go through difficult circumstances, whether it's a health challenge or a financial crisis or whatever, is that God uses those circumstances to imprint himself on our lives so that people can see that, And sometimes on the surface it looks hideous, but there's a beauty, a hidden beauty that people see in our lives when we've journeyed through those difficult times. So those are things that I'm really working on rebuilding my life on. It talks about in Corinthians about the fire and the wood, hay, and stubble, and how we need to rebuild our lives on things that are going to last eternally. And so that's what I'm doing.
Every page of your book is really filled with one story after another. It's really amazing how many stories you were able to compile. 20 years of practicing medicine, you have seen every kind of diagnosis, from the something that was minor but evoked a great fear response in somebody, because kind of the Job experience, he said, that which I feared the most has come upon me. That somebody has a recurring pain, they've been ignoring it, there's a family history of cancer, they've always had this kind of deep fear. They saw grandma fade away, and then they saw another parent, and they were much closer to that, and they saw that, and they said they didn't want their children to ever see it. They lived with that hidden fear, that real secret dark night of the soul kind of fear, and now they have this recurring pain, and they want to ignore it because they don't want to even acknowledge that it's possible that what they'd feared the most has come to pass. And finally it comes to the point where they've got to go see you, and you examine them and you say, well, you really need to stop eating salsa at 10:30 at night, because what you've done is your esophagus, you've scorched it, and so we're going to put you on an antacid, and we're going to stop this reflux, and it's a lifestyle change. You're just going to have to give up the hot sauce before bedtime because you're hurting. And they're going, seriously? I don't have, this isn't stomach cancer, this isn't ulcerative colitis, this is just a really bad habit you've gotten yourself into of chips and dip before you go to bed every night. And
yes, sir.
You've had that experience, but their fear is real, and their trust in God, as much as they say, I'm faithful, I'm there when the doors are open, that's fine when it happens to somebody else, but when it happens to you, you tend to think that God maybe forgot you, or that something from your past may be interfering, or maybe are your prayers really being answered, and what if, and what if, and what if, and you go down this path of what if till you've scared yourself half to death.
Yes, it's amazing. I always tell people 90% of the things that we worry about never happen, and those that do are only about 10% as bad as what we think. It's funny how our mind plays tricks on us. It's the scriptures tell us over and over and over to not be afraid. It's interesting. Every time someone has an encounter with God, there's this sense of fear that comes in our lives, and we there's a lot of things that we fear. We fear the changes in our life that a disease may have. We fear maybe the pain of going through suffering. But God has promised that whatever circumstance that we are put in life, sometimes even if we bring ourselves on those circumstances, like eating too much salsa, like you were talking about, God is still there, and He will give us the power. He will either deliver us, or He will give us the power to endure those circumstances. It's not by coincidence that we go through those things, and so often it's just a lack of perspective, and that's what these stories do. In fact, these stories change people's focus. I had a patient once that I'd taken a colon cancer out. Her name was Mona, and she had done real well with the colon cancer surgery, and I was called back in to see her like 10 years later. And so anyway, Mona was freaking out because they had found a new mass in her pelvis, and it was a big ovarian cystic looking mass. And of course, the first thing that went across everybody's mind is that she had ovarian cancer, and she was just, it's funny how our mind begins to multiply, fears and things. And all of a sudden what was a cystic mass became an ovarian cancer, and they had a lot of things going on in their lives, as we all do. And, but really just tell them that one thing, that, hey, 90% of the things we worry about never happen, and so often we forget what we should remember, and we remember what we should forget. Earlier we were talking about, the Israel in the Promised Land. They forgot that God had brought them through the Red Sea when they approached, Kadesh Barnea, and they were going to go in. They forgot all the good things that God had done in their lives and all the blessings. And we're the same way so often. We forget that, if God brought us through in the past, He's going to take us through, to the future. As it says, like in Deuteronomy, He brought you out to bring you in, And so we forget that. But then also we remember the things that we should have forgotten. When they got in those typical circumstances, they start saying to Moses and to Joshua and Caleb, wait a minute. Man, we had melons back there in Egypt, and we had it good. And, except they forgot the scars on their back, from the slave, from the whippings and things. So, remembering what we need to remember and forgetting the things in the past that we need to forgive. God is always faithful. And that's the thing I've realized, and so many people demonstrate in their lives the faithfulness of God. And that's what this book is about, how people have learned to focus on God's faithfulness, on God's adequacy, on God's power to help them through these difficult times.
When you look at the stories, I'd like you to pick one and kind of walk us through one that just sticks out in your remembrance, one that was really touching for you as you were putting pen to paper and recalling and recounting the faith of this person, that kind of jumps out at you as one so that our audience can get an idea of the content and how you approached writing the book, get a little flavor for you and your writing style?
Well, there are so many. I would say one that really meant a lot to me personally was one when my mother was dying of lung cancer. Now, my mother was as healthy as a horse and never smoked, didn't have any risk factors for lung cancer. She developed a cough, and it was treated as pneumonia, and it faked everybody out. I mean, she had all the CAT scans, and everything was normal, but yet somehow she developed cancer. And in that time, it was a really difficult time for me because, I can fix other people's problems, but I couldn't help my mother. And I had this lady come into my practice. She had a locally advanced breast cancer. Her name was Kathleen. And her kids found out about it, and of course they sent her to the emergency room. Well, Kathleen knew it was an emergency. And at first it was kind of this disconnect. You wondered if Catherine really, it's like was she neglecting herself? As I got to know Kathleen over time, I realized it wasn't that she was necessarily neglecting herself, it's just that she was thinking about others more than she was herself. And so as we went through her surgery and all of her treatment and everything, she found out that my mother had lung cancer. And I was grieving, and this lady was about the age of my mother, and she part of the way she fellowshiped with God is she would go out to the river and pick pecans. And she'd pick pecans and put them in little sacks and give them to people as a gift and pray for people as she picked those pecans. And now I love pecans. I'm from Texas, and I also love hot sauce, by the way. But anyway, she'd bring these pecans in, and she'd ask me about my mother, and it was rare that we ever had any conversation about her cancer. She just didn't think of herself at all. And, in that process of her ministering to me, can you imagine a patient with cancer ministering to their doctor? God brought healing in my life through just her words of encouragement and bringing me those pecans and asking me about my mother and praying for me and my mother. It really did something to me. And that's kind of the whole focus of the book. So often when we go through problems, difficult circumstances, we tend to look inward. We tend to ask all those questions. Why me? Why now? Why God? What if? We ask all those questions. And there's nothing wrong with that. Job asked God, 16 times in the book of Job why this was happening. He wanted an audience with God and God to explain all this to him. And of course, God never did. But instead of looking inward, we need to begin looking upward, realizing that God brought us into these circumstances for a purpose, and that He's going to give us either the power to endure these circumstances, or He's going to deliver us from those circumstances. But He's faithful, and then begin to look outward and begin to look for, hey, who can I encourage? Who can I bless? Maybe when I'm there going to see the doctor or the oncologist, who can I, impart, something into their lives. And those are the people I realize that do the best. It's those people that begin to focus outward on other people. And that's what Catherine did for me.
By connecting with these stories, someone who's facing their own challenge, their own diagnosis, their own struggle, either a loved one. My daughter right now is 36 weeks pregnant, and we're waiting to find out, and I'm waiting for a text message as to whether or not she has preeclampsia.
Wow.
We're waiting for the call. So they drew the blood yesterday. We're waiting for the results. Her blood pressure's high, elevated. There's some protein, and so is it time to bring the baby, or are they going to try to do some bed rest? What's going to happen? So I'm just waiting here while this is going on. And as I've shared with our audience, kind of this story, they know that my daughter's adopted. She was a newborn in July 18th, tomorrow. She'll be 30 years old. 3 months after I brought her home, I died of pneumococcal pneumonia.
Wow. Explain.
3 months later. So I'm laying on a crash cart. My lungs are completely full. I code. They hit me with the paddles. I'm there. The ambulance is taking me into Brea Hospital in Brea, California. I had a near-death experience. I saw them working on me. All I did was, the only thing I have any recollection of was watching them, and I said, somehow I know that I said this. I cried out, don't know who I was talking to. I wasn't a believer at the time. I said, what about the promise I made to the baby? That's all I remember.
Wow.
Moments later, it might have been an hour, I don't know how long, I awoke. I was still on the gurney, but my arms were wrapped around the baby. So
wow.
They brought me back. Jim Henson of the Muppets died of the same strain of pneumococcal pneumonia that I had. It was a very, very virulent strain that swept through California. And the fact that I got treatment hours, he waited too long.
Too long.
He died. I was on that edge. So they began pumping me. I spent 4.5 days in ICU. In a bed of ice, packed in ice. Fever about 105. As an adult, 38 years old, that kind of sustained fever can do a whole lot of damage. But they packed me in ice, and so as I'm thinking about, here's this precious daughter now going through her own struggle, I'm reminded to go back and remember how God spared me. God not only spared me, but then years later, I came to faith. Then she came to faith. Now we have a first grandchild, in the oven, and we're facing a challenge. And it's prayer going back and forth between my daughter and I, just praying for God's outcome, His decision. Is Mila going to be born today or tomorrow on my daughter's birthday? Maybe that's His perfect plan. We don't know, but we're just trusting and believing. So it is important that not only do we share, because when we share, that gives people the opportunity to share. And so
Absolutely.
when we open the door for dialogue like this, like you did with this patient who knew that you were going through something yourself, gave her an opportunity to minister to you. Everybody has a story. That's why the Scripture tells us that we are overcomers by the word of our testimony and the blood of the Lamb. This is a book full of testimonies of people who have gone through. The outcome for all of us is the same. The ratio of life to death is 1 to 1. So where you spend eternity is the only variable in the equation. And so was it your hope that people would come to an understanding of God's plan for their life by giving them some examples of others who faced the same challenge with courage and faith?
Absolutely. The old saying, if you're born once, you die twice. If you're born twice, you die once. wow, Rabbi Eric, you probably need to write your own book. That's an amazing story of how God was faithful. But even in your challenges now, I mean, God will continue to be faithful. Let me tell you a story about. I guess about a year ago, I was in Gabon at Bongolo Hospital, and I was covering for some surgeons, and they were going to a conference. That's what I do, is I cover for these surgeons and train the residents while they're gone. And I didn't know that I also was going to be the obstetrician. So the obstetrician called me on the phone and said, "Hey, Doc, I got a lady with triplets on board. We put a cerclage in. That means they close the pike and with the stitches." He said, "Got a cerclage on board. She's 26 weeks, and just try to keep them in the oven till I get back." Well, of course, as soon as she got on the plane, everything broke loose, and we did the best we could to leave those triplets in. At 26 weeks, it's pretty bad, especially in a place that has no resources. I mean, there's no ventilators, there's no, neonatologist. I mean, it's a pretty grim kind of prognosis in that situation. We were able to keep those babies in for 3 days, and they were born a little bit under 27 weeks. And I don't know how this happened. I mean, I was put in some situations that I've never been put in before, as a general surgeon. That's a little bit on the periphery of what I do. But, we delivered one of those babies, a regular delivery, and the other two by C-section because we had to, prematurely, of course. And, they emailed me back about 3 months later, and those little triplets, all three of those triplets left the hospital.
Wow.
And so just thinking about God's faithfulness in that situation, I am not a high-risk obstetrician, I can do a C-section and that's about it, and I'm not a neonatologist. But in spite of all those things, God was faithful, and it was God's purpose and will for those kids to live.
Amen.
And so, that's not in the book, by the way. That's just another story I don't know what to do with. But I thought that was appropriate for you and for your daughter, that God is faithful and He's adequate in whatever, circumstances we face.
Well, it's an amazing book. It's a book filled with encouragement. It's Dr. Charles Page's new book, A Spoonful of Courage for the Sick and Suffering, Transforming Your Greatest Challenges into Your Biggest Blessings. It's a compilation of testimonies, inspiring stories about ordinary people responding in extraordinary ways to health challenges, encouragement, faith stories, believing and trusting in the sovereignty of God, using the opportunities to share, to touch others' lives while they were still going through their own challenges. And so in difficulty, we're looking for, as Peter Rosenberg says, to put our scared hand into His scarred hand, and believe that God is not going to leave us or forsake us. And so if you're overwhelmed with sickness, discouragement, and challenges, you're not alone. This book is for you. And we want to encourage you to get A Spoonful of Courage for the Sick and Suffering. Dr. Charles Page, thank you for sharing this with us here on Revealing the Truth.
It was an honor to be here, sir.
God bless you, my friend. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.